my pleasure to chair this evening's webinar, and our guest speaker, Stephanie Maywison from Maastricht. She's currently a resident in internal medicine, having completed her PhD at Maastricht. And now, as we were talking just before we started, she's in the honorable, or the tremendous position of being a clinician who's managing to continue her research career. So over to you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Bob. Let's first share my screen, which is the most exciting part of this evening for me. But I hope you by now see, well, I think a beautiful background, a painting my aunt made actually when I was finishing my PhD about team learning at work. What I'm going to talk about today is how to work towards constructive conflicts in interdisciplinary and interprofessional teamwork, which is quite a lot, I'd say. But the idea behind this beautiful painting, I think, is that there are really lots of different elements that together create, well, in my eyes, a really beautiful painting. Different colors and different elements like trees and stones and water and snow. And together they create such a beautiful view. And I like that my aunt is more creative than I am in terms of painting, and she could do something with my academic work. So that's the background behind the first slide, at least. So today we're going to talk about team learning. And for that, I always think it's important. Now I hope that the next slide will pop up. A bit slow, yeah. I think it's important to realize what we talk about when we talk about teams, because we have lots of teamwork in practice every day, but I think we take for granted lots of collaboration, lots of working together. So I wonder what you see when you look at this picture, and there's no right or wrong. And I hope that we could use an interactive app, that's WooClap. So get this picture in your mind, and then if you go to wooclap.com on your phone, or maybe you can switch screens and put as a code team learn, I hope you can make a choice whether you think what you think is the right term for these people together on this picture, whether you think this is a group or a team. And again, it's your own interpretation, so there's no right or wrong today. But I just wonder your opinion in this. And I see there is one more person that is in the app but didn't react. So let's see if it will be 50-50. Or that nothing comes up. But now I'm interested if I show you the next picture. I'm going to ask the same question again. So I hope you still remember the former picture and now this one. And now I'm curious. Now I have to click. If you answer the same question now, what your opinion is now. Yeah, so now it's 100% team. And since we're with such a small group of people, maybe someone would like to share why you switched minds, or why now it's really clear that this is a team for you. Can I invite someone? Karen?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. I think if you've got your video on, you're fair game. I think in the second one, it was clear that they were supporting each other and they had different roles to play in that activity, whereas in the first one I put group because I wasn't so sure I could see those different roles and that requirement to rely on each other.
Yeah, beautiful. So relying on each other, and I think someone is also chatting. The second pick is a team, all are playing towards a common goal. Yeah, so a common goal, they can rely on each other. That was really clear because they were literally sort of hanging on each other indeed. And this is exactly actually what I meant to provoke with this, with showing these two different pictures, because indeed, in my opinion, also the first one could be a group because they could maybe do individual things for the individual purpose or have an individual goal. Whereas in the second picture, you can really clearly see that they work towards a common goal because they want to give a great performance together. And they probably also feel that they together have to do that, and that there's some kind of interdependence. So they really are relying on each other, like Karen said. So thank you for that. And I think that's a great warm up for the rest of this talk. Let's go on. So yeah, I think in healthcare, I think we often say there's teamwork, but in practice, we might not always see it as a team, but actually maybe quite often work still as a group, so that everyone has still their individual purposes for things. But if you, for example, see what's needed in, for example, an operation theater, you really need each other. You need the anesthesiologist, you need people from radiography maybe, and you need, of course, a surgeon to really work together as a team. And I think it's important to realize what's really needed for that and what's needed to work in a team. And of course, we're going to talk about that today as well. So I use in my title the different terms of interdisciplinary and interprofessional, because I think in clinic, often we work in an interprofessional way, so with different professions. That my talk is, my PhD was on interdisciplinary work. And what's the difference between that? I call it interdisciplinary because my research was done in an academic setting, in which I found people were all some kind of teachers. They were all lecturing and working together on courses, but they did that from different also academic disciplines. So therefore I call it interdisciplinary. But what I wanted to show with this slide is that there's also a really big difference in when we call, I think the first one with the ABC was meant to show you some kind of a more monodisciplinary way, that every discipline is just working on its own project or purpose. The second one is actually showing a more multidisciplinary way, because I think we do often also in clinic work in a multidisciplinary way, that every discipline or profession brings in his or her own disciplinary perspectives and experience. And you can put that all together, and from all those different disciplines together come up with a plan. But really working interdisciplinary or really interprofessional actually means that you try to bring together the different disciplines and try to find the overlap, or try to integrate it in a way that you really come up with something new from all these different disciplines. So I really wanted to work on interdisciplinary teamwork, which goes further than multidisciplinary teamwork. And I'll come back to that also in my talk, because we found that not everyone is working in an interdisciplinary way, of course. So why is this important? I think especially when working with different disciplines and different professions, you can easily see the different perspectives and different maybe solutions to problems. So you can easily end up in a conflict, which is negative. A conflict, especially when it becomes more relational about you as a person, it becomes even sometimes hostile. But you can also work from different perspectives towards a constructive conflict, and that's something positive actually. And I'll talk to you about that in a second because it really has to do with team learning as well. Yeah, so when we started to understand how people work together in our academic setting, we tried to find a way how to look at collaboration and teamwork. And I was working with a professor from the business school, and in business and management science, they use a lens of team learning a lot. And they do that because they have done quite some research in business already on working together, and they found that what's really important about working together is how people really interact with each other. So team learning is actually describing a way people interact with each other, and you can recognize it in their behaviors, but also their discourse. What kind of patterns can you recognize in that? And team learning aims to create, but also retain some kind of a collectively developed cognition, which has been found to lead not only to better team, but also better individual and organizational products. So this sounds really abstract, but what you can recognize is in people's behaviors and how they talk is, first of all, that they share information, that they share experiences and expertise. And team learning levels rise if people integrate different expertise and experiences. So if they really build upon each other's stories, if they ask questions about it, and move beyond just sharing information, the highest level of team learning can occur if people get into a discussion. And that again does not lead to a negative conflict, or not per se, but is actually needed to discuss different opinions and perspectives to lead to a constructive conflict, which again means that you try to integrate ideas and come up with new innovative ideas that you have really created together. So that's a real difference between some kind of a negative conflict, of course. So these behaviors, you can sort of look at them at a sort of a level which starts with sharing, then co-construction, and then constructive conflicts. And again, in research, that has been found over and over again that the higher level of team learning occurs in teams, the better outcomes they reach, and also the more innovation happens. So we looked at our teams in Maastricht University using the lens of team learning, and to understand a bit, also to understand the results and what this talk is about. I think it's good to know that in Maastricht we work with integrated education, so different curricula on health sciences, biomedical sciences, and medicine that use problem-based learning, and the curricula are integrated, so it's not teaching anatomy and pharmacology separately, like in a discipline-oriented curriculum, but it's really about bringing it all together in an integrated curricula. So you, for example, I was taught on a course on shortness of breath, and then in that course you will learn both about the anatomy of lungs and the heart, but also about the physiology, and you get skills training in that, and so it all comes together. So that's the integrated part. So how we organize it is that there are different people from different departments and disciplinary backgrounds that together have to create that education. So people from the different departments work together for the different courses. So we expect different clinicians, but also people from basic sciences and social sciences, statistic department, to all work together on education. So the question was, how do they actually work together, and how can we improve education and their teamwork, and maybe also through that education. So what we found is that they did not all work together. Let's start with that. So looking at it with the lens of team learning, we found that some teams only shared information or barely shared information at all, actually. So they were really fragmented. And what's shown in this picture is what I try to put there schematically is that in red, there's a team leader, and the other blue dots are other team members. And there are like dotted lines in between them showing that there was minimum and interaction between all of them. And the team leader also sometimes admitted, I actually don't really know what the others are doing, but for the peace of sake, I just let them do whatever they do. They have their own discipline. I better not get into a discussion with them. They also shared that they also had some doubts whether their courses and their education was actually well designed, but they let it be. We also found when we were interviewing our teachers that there were people who said, we have our outcomes put there by the university, so we work together in a kind of framework and outcome guided way in which we can have a bit of discussion. So there is a bit more interaction compared to the fragmented teams. But they said still it's set by the university, so we leave it there. So they did have some co-construction. They did try to build upon each other, but it was all quite limited. And we also spoke to people who really said, we put the student in the center. And with that, we really try to together, we really engage in discussions, what's needed for students at this moment in time, and how can we all contribute to the education that the student really needs. So instead of a more disciplinary way of looking at it, like the fragmented teams did, or more an outcome-based view that the framework-guided teams had, the integrated teams really put the student in the center of their work and really tried with that to engage in discussions. And they also shared that they really were happy with the innovative thoughts they had together. And they were really much more satisfied than the people that we spoke that worked in fragmented teams. So we also looked at what students actually thought about these courses given by these different teams. And we found that the students actually evaluated the courses created by integrated teams all higher than the teams that work in a much, less successful way, like fragmented teams and framework guided teams. So indeed, we found, like other research, that the more team learning occurs, the more satisfied people actually are working in that team, but also the better the outcome is. I now, to keep you awake also in the evening, have a question to you. And of course, I realize that you may work in different teams, but if you think about the team you work on in a daily basis or most of the time, what kind of team approach do you recognize if you try to link this to your own daily practice? I can see in the chat that someone is happily, I would say, working in an integrated team approach. But here in the screen, we can only see people working in a fragmented way or more framework guided. So I think also for the sake of time, we continue, but I hope with the rest of the presentation, you might have some practical tips to maybe get towards that integrated team approach. Because of course we were also interested in how can we move beyond the fragmented way of working, how can we move towards more integrated teams. And we found that it has to do with different levels, of course. It has to do with some kind of personal alignment, with team leadership, and with how you're engaged in the organization. And I'll tell a bit more about that. So what we found is that our teachers were very clear about some kind of alignment with the educational organization and with the philosophy. And they were really clear that if there were people in the team that had different ideas about education in general, than that they together had to create, that was really inhibiting team learning to happen. So different attributes and people's tendencies, also whether they were flexible in their thoughts of working together with other disciplines, but also the motivation why they were in this interdisciplinary team, that could all help or hinder team learning to happen. So one quote was by someone who said, well, when someone is asked to be in this team by his or her boss because no one else seemed appropriate, that doesn't really help in wanting to get into discussions about the different expertises in the team and move beyond sharing of information. I think the most important factor seemed to be leadership practices, and that had to do with some levels on the team level, having a clear team vision, what was actually the purpose of that course they were working on. Some made it clear that if there's no vision, if you're not working together when everyone has his or her own idea about something, it's difficult, of course, to really work together in a team. So the vision, having a clear team responsibility, I think that's relating back to the whole team definition, but also some reflection on how you're doing as a team. That was all considered important for team learning to happen. And I think a nice quote was from a teacher who said, like, we ask a lot of feedback and reflection from our students, but we're really not good at it ourselves. So they barely talk at how are we actually working together? Do we like it? Do we want to act differently? And how could we improve it? And leadership practices could, of course, help in both clear vision, feeling responsible for it together, and reflecting. The final factor that we found is that it's important to have a way of involvement in organizational processes that related both to decision making about education, if people were working on education, but it was decided for them what needed to happen, that didn't really support their wanting to share expertise and wanting to work on education. Having some support for working together, but also learning more about working together, but also leadership, because we spoke to quite some course leaders who were also the team leaders actually, and they really admitted that they had no idea how to work with all these different disciplines and lead them actually. And someone of a fragmented team admitted that he said it's just like a forced marriage in which I just sit through the wedding, so to speak. I'm just forced to do this with these people, and that's it. Looking at the chat. Yeah. So when we talk to people, it really seemed it came out really clear that whole leadership issue was important, and daring to reflect, but also the whole thing about talking to each other, sharing, and being able to get into a discussion with each other could be influenced by these individual factors, being involved in the organization, but especially how a leader created space for that. And we moved on in my research project with this knowledge, which also comes from a more business background, because has been a big project 20 years ago by Google. It was called Project Aristotle, and they started to investigate their own teams to understand what makes a team effective. And they looked at many teams, and they found 5 different factors that make up a successful team. which starting at the bottom had to do with impact. People wanted to know that their work really mattered. They wanted to have meaning. They needed a clear structure. They wanted to be able to get things done. But most importantly, there was the factor of psychological safety, which meant that people really felt safe to take risks and were vulnerable in front of each other. And someone who became very famous actually with this whole psychological safety concept is Amy Edmondson. She is a professor at the Harvard Business School. And I think she explains it really nicely as a shared belief in your team that it is safe for interpersonal risk-taking and that you can feel confident that no one on the team will embarrass or punish you for admitting a mistake, asking a question, or offering a new idea. And a bit more technical, she found that it predicts team success and it's mediated by team learning. So psychological safety really has to do with the team success, and it's important for team learning, like we also found in our research, although people, of course, didn't call it psychological safety. And to understand this a bit more, to understand also why is it so difficult maybe to speak up and get into that discussion, she wrote a really nice book. I would advise it to everyone to read it, The Fearless Organization. And she explained that using your voice, so voicing behavior, is uncertain because the organization, you often do it to do it for the greater good, so to say. So for the organization or customers or maybe your patients or students. And you don't know really whether the benefit will occur and whether it will occur. You also know often only after time. Though if you don't say anything and you keep your mouth shut, so to say, you will win yourself very directly because nothing can happen. So this in a way shows why it's often easier to be quiet and choose for silence instead of using your voice really. And I'm going to, for the sake of time, I'm just showing this picture and then we move towards more practical stuff so you can practice with that maybe in your clinic. But I think what's interesting that what she found is that in one of her first studies, she looked at the reporting of medical errors and mistakes. And she found that better teams reported more mistakes. And first it looked like these people made more mistakes, but it was really about the open culture that people really reported more mistakes. So the other teams where it looked like errors didn't happen, they just didn't dare to report mistakes. So this was one of our first studies in which psychological safety became, was clearly such an important factor. And I think if you realize this and this study, you might look at, the world in that completely different view. So I'm going to skip this for the sake of time. And I'm going to have a final question for you. Oh, I went too fast now. Oh. My final question is about leadership. You can just put a word, I think, in the app and it will pop up in a word cloud, I hope, in a second. Someone either has a really good boss or believes that leadership is still something the manager, the boss does. But I see some nice terms coming up. Inspiring, bringing out the best in everyone, enabling, collaborating, listening. And my boss is a great role model. Okay, that's good. Listening actively, promoting, yeah, so bringing out the best in everyone, promoting. I think you think alike quite well. You think, thank you for joining in this practice. The reason why I wanted you to think about it is that leadership really has a big effect on whether team learning can occur, and lots of time leadership is still be seen as something people do to manage. And what we found in our studies is that it was really often necessary to really bring people together and get people to talk and share and get into that discussion. So I like to look at leadership in terms of what's needed for team learning as leadership inclusiveness behavior. And that's literally asking for people to act and use words that invite and appreciate others. Since there is in an interdisciplinary team always a diversity of people, so it's really the question, how can you get them on board and how can you bring them together? So it really focuses on appreciating and the belonging of every unique individual by inviting them and getting an open atmosphere and have an accessible atmosphere as well. And also this really many research they have confirmed the positive impact of inclusive leader behavior and engagement in teams. So for one of our final studies, we looked at inclusive team leadership on team learning. And what we found, now it's going too fast. What we found when we followed one of those integrated teams for a year is that the team leader did 5 different behaviors that really made team learning happen. So she was coordinating the task very well. She was very clear in what needed to be done, but she was also coordinating the people in her team very well. So she also knew what other people were capable of, what they wanted to learn, what kind of tasks they would be happy with to do. And she was very explicit also in both. So explicit in tasks, but also in her people. Also very explicit in her feelings, whether she was proud or in doubt about whether some choices were right or not. And she was very explicitly inviting people to the table. So asking people whether they have different thoughts, whether they want to bring different opinions or subjects to the agenda. And she tried to connect people as well by both making jokes and having fun, but also she wasn't afraid of reflecting on things that weren't going well. And in that way also connected everyone to work together as a team. And what we saw from seeing that behavior and seeing that happening is that it actually resulted in people, in the team members, actively participating, but also that they dare to speak up and dare to say that they didn't agree with stuff, or they had questions, or they were in doubt, or they actually did agree. And when the leader wasn't there, they actually mimicked that behavior. So they started being as open as she was, asking for each other's different opinions, and still mimicking that very explicit behavior, both on a task and a person level. So bringing that back to maybe also clinic, I think what's most important is that it's important to really acknowledge that we need each other, because healthcare will be more and more complex every day, and we cannot do that all by ourselves. So acknowledging the interdependencies is really important. And what's often difficult and easily can get into conflict is the hierarchy and power dynamics, because that often results in a not open atmosphere in which people don't really dare to speak up. So therefore, it's important to try to reduce that hierarchy and those power dynamics, so it is a safe environment and people can really talk to each other freely, and with that also avoid that there are errors made and people don't feel free to talk about what they see is actually not going right, but they just don't dare to talk about it. So in practice, I think and I've experienced this myself. I was a resident when I noticed people weren't happy working together on a ward, nurses, doctors. I try to really get people talking. So if you don't start with talking, you'll end up in a very difficult situation, and then conflicts can happen. So I use some kind of like the 3 Ds to work through that. And the first D is actually just to disclose what's going on, whether you have certain ideas or experiences. And if that's the starting point, if people do disclose whatever is happening and in their mind, then you can start to have a dialogue together to understand each other, to build upon the different ideas and opinions that are on the table. And then the third D, and I think that's then not even the most difficult one, but that's to try to discuss it and integrate the different perspectives. And then you can really work towards that constructive conflict, which is really a positive thing. But I think the hardest thing to do is starting with the first. And if you have that one, I think it's more easy that the rest will follow. So that was actually my talk, which was mainly based on my research, and you now understand why the whole mountain is there. And I'm happy to answer some questions. If I didn't see them in the chat, but I hope you can share them now if you like.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. That was fascinating and not quite what I was expecting, which made it even better. If anybody wants to ask a question, you can either put up your hand like that, or type it in the box in the chat. I'm going to take chairman's prerogative, and what struck me was your title on constructive conflict. But what really does seem that there is a Goldilocks zone, that there can be too much, too little, and just enough. Is that a message that there are times when perhaps we should be trying to provoke some conflict, some constructive conflict within a team to try and perhaps to try and get the creative juices going?
Yeah, I really think so, to be honest. I think with the fact that we're working together now so often with all these different perspectives, also that we might take for granted that people have different perspectives and we don't really know what's in their mind or what they have, what kind of experiences they have. So that's why I think starting with just sharing what people think and then ending up in really trying to really discuss it, because only then I really believe that innovative thoughts will happen, because we cannot think of these things all by ourselves. So putting some constructive conflicts in it on purpose, I'd say if you really try to have a good discussion, I think magic can happen. So I think we should try it for good teamwork.
Okay. Karen?
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. That was great. And I love the images. They really sort of helped put across sort of the concepts. That I really enjoyed your talk. One of the things I was wondering about is, we're not all lucky enough to work for those kinds of leaders all the time. And often our organizations, the wider organizational culture, even if a leader of a team can create this inclusive psychologically safe space where it's okay to question and challenge, that may not be safe in the wider organization. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that I suspect psychological safety is different in different parts of organizations, and how do leaders navigate that, and how do team members navigate that?
Yeah, that's a great question and challenge, I guess, right? So I think you already say like we're working in so many some kind of community of practice, you can call it or whatever, but we're working in a small team maybe, or different teams even, and we have this broad umbrella organization or maybe multiple organizations, and that all influences, I think, the amount of psychological safety and how people are reacting in that. So yeah, it's a very cultural thing, and cultures, like you say, can differ in lots of different elements of an organization. So I think it would be really good if leaders higher up in an organization, if they dare to admit mistakes, and if they are role models, it would be, I think, much easier for people bottom up to sort of accept that culture and do the same. But I think we should also do it all bottom up and in our small cultures. But I think it would be really nice if all board of directors would read the Fearless organization and be role models themselves. But yeah, I admit that that's really difficult. And as a resident, I also go from one hospital to the other, and I also work in an academic setting. And so I realize also that I'm adjusting myself every time and looking like, oh, can we say that here, or will I be punished? So it really depends on the culture, and I think we all can be leaders in that and set the example. But it would be nice if we all in whatever level work towards that. But I don't have the answer how to do it.
Does anyone else have a question you'd like to ask? Can I just have one of my, I apologize for this, one of my PhD Viva questions. What surprised you most about your work?
Well, to be really honest, it might sound really naive, but when I started, I thought I would talk to teachers, like my old teachers, and they were all professionals, and I expected them to all work together in a way that is that I thought professional adult people would do. So I was just really surprised when I started to interview people that people were actually really frustrated so often that they didn't really work together in a nice way. And sometimes I just really regretted that I had to speak with people that were so frustrated about their team that didn't work the way they wanted. And they were so stuck in that, like the person that said it's like a forced marriage. I thought that's so bad that happened. So I think I was most struck by that. Yeah, but that's real life, and that's when people that's what happens when people are put together, I guess. And that doesn't matter if you put students together or professionals. It's still a challenge. So that was a big eye opener for me, because I was just graduated and I thought adult life would be so much easier. It wasn't.
That's a fascinating mirror to hold up to us all.
Yeah.
And I think we should all look in that particular mirror. Just one last comment from Sue, and then we'll wind up.
Stephanie, thank you so much. That was really interesting. I work in a multidisciplinary team on a daily basis, and quite often I get to the stage where I just think this team is not functional, and it's fantastic to be able to think a little bit about why. But if you were to try and put your hand up in such a team, I know you with doing the 3Ds, what would be the first thing you would do, and who would you approach?
Yeah, I remember the instances when I did it, and I think I was inspired on my research, of course, is when I noticed with like non-verbal behavior that people weren't happy with something, and that I really just reflected on that and invited people to talk about it, because I think often you do see or notice when people aren't, when something in the collaboration isn't going well. And this was a case where just nurses were like with their hands on each other, making very clear that they didn't agree on things that we were deciding together. So that was, I think, quite easy to say, like, apparently you don't agree. So what's going on? And then you can start talking, I think.
Okay, thank you,
I would
Thank you,
use the
Stephanie.
challenge as the starting point for making your collaboration better.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you for your insights, and also thank you for the mirror you held up, and that perhaps we to see ourselves as others see us is not what we expect. But I hope everybody will join together and say thank you, and hope everybody enjoyed it. Just before we leave, a call out for the next ASME Bite Sizes. The next one's on the 25th of October, and it's tips for teaching evidence-based medicine in clinical practice, which hopefully will be of interest to many clinicians. And then after that comes a short series of, which comes from a place close to me and my interest in careers and helping people develop their careers, on how to get the best from, first of all, your mentor, and then your research supervisor, and then your clinical supervisor, your consultant. So if anyone's interested in any of those, please join us. And finally, thank you, Stephanie, and thank you everyone for joining us. Okay, good night.